I still remember the exact moment my world shifted on what was supposed to be the most magical day of my life. It was a warm September afternoon in Charleston, South Carolina, and the historic plantation venue was draped in soft white lights and cascading wisteria. My name is Emma, and at 32, I thought I had everything figured out. My fiance Michael and I had been together for 6 years, carefully planning every detail of our wedding day. The guest list included 150 of our closest family and friends, each person carefully chosen to witness our union. But sometimes, the people you trust the most are the ones who can hurt you the deepest. Let me take you back to the beginning to help you understand why what happened cut so deep. Ryan had been my best friend since college. We met during freshman orientation at the University of Georgia, both of us nervous 18-year-olds trying to find our place in the world. He was the guy who held my hair back when I got food poisoning from the sketchy campus food truck, who stayed up all night helping me study for organic chemistry, and who introduced me to Michael at a 4th of July barbecue 7 years ago. When Michael proposed to me on the beach in Savannah, Ryan was the first person I called. There was never a question about who would be the best man at our wedding. Similarly, my maid of honor, Jessica, had been my rock since we were 12 years old. We grew up in the same suburban Atlanta neighborhood, riding bikes together after school and sharing secrets during countless sleepovers. She was there through my awkward teenage years, my first heartbreak, and every milestone in between. Jessica had this infectious energy that could light up any room, with her honey blonde hair and perpetual smile. She worked as a pediatric nurse, which surprised no one who knew her caring nature. When I asked her to be my maid of honor, she cried happy tears and immediately started planning my bachelorette party. The funny thing is, Ryan and Jessica had only met a handful of times before the wedding planning began. There was my engagement party, of course, and a few group dinners when Jessica visited from Atlanta. But once we started the wedding preparations, they began spending more time together. At first, I thought it was sweet. They were both so invested in making our day perfect that they'd text each other about surprise elements for the reception and coordinate their speeches. Michael and I would joke about playing matchmaker, saying, wouldn't it be perfect if our best friends fell in love too? Looking back now, I can see the signs I missed. The way Jessica would blush when Ryan's name came up in conversation. How Ryan suddenly became very interested in helping with wedding details he'd normally find boring, like flower arrangements and seating charts. During our joint bachelor and bachelorette party weekend in Nashville, they spent most of the time talking to each other at the bar while the rest of us danced. But I was so wrapped up in my own happiness, so focused on my upcoming marriage, that I brushed off these little moments. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and beautiful. I woke up in the bridal suite surrounded by my bridesmaids, the smell of coffee and excitement filling the air. My mother, Helen, was already bustling around, making sure everyone had their hair appointments scheduled correctly. She'd been planning this day almost as long as I had, creating spreadsheets and timelines with military precision. My father, Robert, was probably already at the venue, supervising the setup with the determination of a man who'd spent 30 years in construction management. Jessica seemed nervous that morning, which I attributed to normal maid of honor jitters. She kept checking her phone and disappearing to make calls, claiming she was confirming details with vendors. Her hands shook slightly as she helped me into my dress, a stunning A-line gown with delicate lace detailing that had been my grandmother's reimagined for a modern bride. "You look absolutely perfect," she whispered, but her eyes seemed distant, focused on something beyond the moment. The photographer, a bubbly woman named Sarah, captured every moment as we got ready. My sister Claire helped with my makeup, her steady hands a contrast to her usually chaotic personality. My cousin Lisa poured champagne for everyone, though I noticed Jessica barely touched hers. The other bridesmaids, my college roommate Amy and Michael's sister Rebecca, chatted excitedly about the reception plans. Everything felt exactly as I'd imagined it would, surrounded by the women I loved most in the world. Meanwhile, Michael later told me that Ryan had been acting strange all morning too. He'd been pacing in the groom's suite, running his hands through his dark hair repeatedly and mumbling about making sure his speech was perfect. Michael's brother David, who served as a groomsman alongside our mutual friends Tom and Carlos, tried to calm him down with jokes and whiskey, but Ryan remained on edge. He kept pulling out the speech notes from his jacket pocket, reading them over and over as if memorizing lines for a play. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock, timed perfectly to catch the golden hour light filtering through the massive oak trees. As my father walked me down the aisle, his arms steady and reassuring under mine, I felt like I was floating. The string quartet played Canon in D, just as I'd dreamed since I was a little girl. Michael stood at the altar looking devastatingly handsome in his charcoal gray suit, his green eyes bright with unshed tears. Father Martinez, who had known Michael's family for 20 years, smiled warmly as we approached. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Michael's vows made me cry, especially when he talked about how I'd changed his life from the moment we met, how my laugh was his favorite sound in the world, and how he promised to love me through every season of our lives. My own vows spoke of partnership, of building a life together brick by brick, of being each other's safe harbor in any storm. Our mothers were both crying, tissues clutched in their hands. Even my tough-as-nails Uncle Frank was wiping his eyes discreetly. When Father Martinez pronounced us husband and wife, the kiss felt like coming home. The guests erupted in cheers as we walked back down the aisle as Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, flower petals falling around us like snow. The cocktail hour was magical, with a jazz trio playing under the Spanish moss while guests mingled and enjoyed past hors d'oeuvres. The photographer captured candid moments of joy, laughter echoing across the grounds as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The reception space took my breath away when we entered. The barn had been transformed into an enchanted garden, with thousands of fairy lights creating a canopy of stars overhead. Eucalyptus and white roses adorned every table, and the dance floor gleamed under the vintage chandeliers we'd found at an antique market in Savannah. Our first dance was to At Last by Etta James, Michael spinning me slowly as our guests watched with smiles on their faces. My grandfather, despite his 85 years and arthritic hip, insisted on a dance too, telling me I looked just like my grandmother on their wedding day. Dinner was served family style, encouraging conversation and connection among our guests. The menu featured all our favorites, from the shrimp and grits that reminded us of our first date to the red velvet cake that Michael had surprised me with on my 30th birthday. The atmosphere was warm and intimate, filled with the kind of joy that comes from bringing together all the people you love in one place. My Aunt Patricia regaled our table with embarrassing stories from my childhood, while Michael's best friend from high school shared tales of their teenage misadventures. Then came time for the speeches. My father went first, his voice thick with emotion as he welcomed Michael to our family and shared memories of teaching me to ride a bike, attending my college graduation, and knowing from our first family dinner together that Michael was the one. He ended by saying that a father's job is to raise a daughter who doesn't need him anymore, but who still wants him around, and that he couldn't be prouder of the woman I'd become. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Jessica's speech started beautifully. She talked about our friendship, how we'd grown from giggling teenagers to confident women, how she'd watched me navigate heartbreaks and triumphs with grace. She shared the story of how I'd called her immediately after Michael proposed, so excited I could barely form coherent sentences. She spoke about Michael's dedication to making me happy, how he'd once driven 3 hours just to bring me soup when I was sick. The guests were laughing and crying in equal measure, and then it was Ryan's turn. He stood up, straightening his tie nervously, and cleared his throat. The beginning of his speech was everything you'd expect from a best man. He talked about meeting Michael in college, their shared love of football and terrible beer, how Michael had changed when he met me. He shared funny stories about Michael's attempts to impress me in the early days, including the disastrous cooking class incident that ended with the fire department being called. Everyone was laughing, including us. But tonight, Ryan continued, his voice suddenly taking on a different quality, isn't just about celebrating Michael and Emma's love. Tonight is about celebrating all kinds of love, the kind that surprises you when you least expect it. I felt a slight unease creep into my stomach, but pushed it aside. This was Ryan, after all. He'd probably had a bit too much to drink during cocktail hour. He went on, "You see, sometimes life has a way of bringing people together in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes you meet someone who changes everything you thought you knew about yourself, who makes you want to be better, who makes every day brighter just by being in it." His eyes found Jessica in the crowd, and suddenly my blood ran cold. "Jessica," he said, his voice growing stronger. "From the moment we started planning this wedding together, I knew you were special. Your kindness, your laugh, the way you care about everyone around you, it all captured my heart in a way I never expected." The room had grown eerily quiet, the kind of silence that falls when everyone simultaneously realizes something significant is happening. Jessica stood up slowly, her eyes wide, and I thought for a moment she might run, but instead she started walking toward where Ryan stood at the head table. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Not at my wedding. Not during the speeches. Not in front of everyone I knew and loved. Ryan reached into his jacket pocket, and when his hand emerged holding a small velvet box, gasps rippled through the crowd. "Jessica Marie Collins," he said, dropping to one knee right there beside the head table. "You've made me believe in forever. Will you marry me?" The silence that followed felt eternal. I was frozen in place, my hand gripping Michael's so tightly I'm sure I was cutting off his circulation. Jessica's face cycled through a dozen emotions in the space of seconds. Then, with tears streaming down her face, she practically screamed, "Yes!" and launched herself at Ryan. They kissed passionately, completely oblivious to the room around them. But the room was far from celebratory. The silence was broken by a loud, sharp boo from the back of the room, then another, and another. Soon, the entire reception hall was filled with the sound of our guests expressing their displeasure. It was like something out of a movie, except this was my life, my wedding, my supposedly perfect day crumbling before my eyes. That's when my father, who'd been steadily working his way through bourbon since cocktail hour, decided to take matters into his own hands. He stood up, grabbed his beer bottle, and before anyone could stop him, hurled the contents directly at Ryan and Jessica. The amber liquid splashed across Ryan's suit and Jessica's pale pink bridesmaid dress, foam dripping down their shocked faces. As if my father's action had broken some invisible dam, other guests began following suit. My Uncle Tony threw his wine, the red liquid staining Jessica's dress like blood. My cousin Maria tossed her champagne, and even sweet elderly Mrs. Patterson from down the street emptied her water glass on them. Within moments, Ryan and Jessica were completely drenched, standing in a puddle of various beverages as the crowd continued to boo and shout. Jessica's carefully styled updo had collapsed, makeup streaming down her face in black rivers. She let out a sob and ran toward the exit, her soaked dress clinging to her as she stumbled in her heels. Ryan stood there for a moment longer, looking around the room as if he couldn't quite process what was happening. Then my father, in a move that would become legendary in our family lore, stuck out his foot just as Ryan tried to follow Jessica. Ryan went down hard, face planting on the barn's polished floor with a sound that made everyone wince. He scrambled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and anger, and sprinted after Jessica without looking back. The barn fell silent again, but this time it was the stunned silence that follows a catastrophe. My perfect wedding reception had turned into a disaster in less than 5 minutes. I could feel 200 eyes on me, waiting to see what I would do. I stood up on shaking legs, pulling Michael with me, and we walked out. I didn't run, didn't cry, just walked with as much dignity as I could muster while my world fell apart. Behind us, I could hear the murmur of voices rising, our guests trying to process what they'd just witnessed. My mother's voice rose above the rest, attempting to restore some order, but I couldn't focus on her words. Outside, I found Ryan and Jessica standing by the valet station. They were both soaked through, looking like they'd been caught in a hurricane. Jessica's dress, which had been a soft blush pink, was now stained with red wine and beer, the fabric clinging to her in ways that would have been embarrassing under different circumstances. Ryan's gray suit was ruined, dark patches spreading across the fabric. When Ryan saw me approaching, his eyes widened with what looked like fear mixed with indignation. But before I could speak, he raised his hands defensively and said something that stunned me even more than his proposal had. "This isn't fair," he said, his voice shaking but defiant. "We didn't deserve that. We were just trying to share something special, something beautiful. I thought people would be happy for us." I stopped in my tracks, unable to believe what I was hearing. Michael's hand on my back was the only thing keeping me grounded. "You didn't deserve that?" I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "You hijacked my wedding reception and you think you're the victim here?" Ryan shook his head frantically, water droplets flying from his hair. No, you don't understand. It wasn't supposed to go like this. We didn't mean to ruin anything. I thought, we're all friends here. We're celebrating love. I thought you'd be happy for me. For us." The words kept pouring out of him, each one making me angrier. "Happy for you?" I could hear my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. This was supposed to be about Michael and me, about our marriage, not your proposal. "But why can't it be both?" Ryan shot back, his own voice growing louder. "Why can't we share the moment? You're my best friend. I thought you, of all people, would understand. This isn't just some random day for me either. I've been planning this, waiting for the right moment and being surrounded by all this love. It felt perfect. Jessica is the love of my life, just like Michael is yours." Behind him, Jessica finally looked up from the ground where she'd been staring. Her face was a mess of smeared makeup and tears, but she still didn't speak. She just stood there, clutching the ring box Ryan must have handed her, looking like she wanted to disappear entirely. I took a deep breath, trying to find words that wouldn't come out as screams. You thought my wedding reception was the right time? You couldn't wait one single day? Not even until after the reception was over? Ryan groaned, running his hands through his wet hair in frustration. You're blowing this out of proportion. It was one moment, just one little moment, and now everyone hates us. We got drenched like we're criminals or something. I thought we were family. I never expected this from you, from any of you. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. The level of delusion was astounding. You don't get to play the victim here. You made our wedding about you, and now you're surprised that people are upset? He sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping like a scolded child. I just didn't think it would matter that much. I didn't think it would overshadow anything. I swear on everything I hold dear, I didn't mean to ruin your day. I just wanted to create a beautiful memory, too. I stared at him for a long moment, searching for any sign of the friend I thought I knew. The Ryan I remembered from college would never have done something like this. He would have understood boundaries, respect, basic social etiquette. But the man standing in front of me, soaking wet and still trying to justify his actions, was a stranger. Maybe we need some time apart, I finally said, my voice flat and tired. If you really can't see why what you did was wrong, then I don't know what else there is to say. He nodded slowly, his expression morphing into something between regret and continued frustration. Fine, if that's what you want. If you're really going to throw away 15 years of friendship over one mistake. Without another word, I turned and walked back into the reception hall, Michael's arm around my shoulders. Behind us, I could hear car doors slamming and the screech of tires as Ryan and Jessica made their escape. The damage, however, was already done. Inside, the reception had devolved into chaos. Half the guests were gathered in small groups, voices raised in animated discussion about what they'd witnessed. The other half seemed to be trying to pretend nothing had happened, dancing to music that felt hollow and forced. My mother intercepted me at the door, her face a mask of forced calm that didn't quite hide the fury in her eyes. Sweetheart, she said, pulling me into a quick hug. Your father and I are handling things. The band is going to play, the bar is still open, and we're going to salvage what we can of this reception. Her voice dropped lower. And don't you worry about those two. They're not welcome in this family anymore. But how do you salvage a wedding reception after something like that? How do you get back to celebrating when everyone just watched your best friends betray you in the most public way possible? Michael and I tried. We danced. As Michael and I sat in our honeymoon suite later that night, still in our wedding clothes, but too emotionally exhausted to change, my phone buzzed constantly with messages from Ryan. Each one was he'd been to 50, maybe times they continued. He sent Jessica. They were by the time she looked at me. Michael wasn't happy about it, but he understood my need for closure. Just be careful, he warned. Don't let him manipulate you into forgiving him before you're ready. We met at a small coffee shop downtown, the kind of place with exposed brick walls and the constant hiss of the espresso machine. I arrived early, choosing a table in the corner where we'd have some privacy. When Ryan walked in, I barely recognized him. He looked terrible, like he hadn't been sleeping. His usually perfectly styled hair was a mess, his clothes wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He sat down across from me, clutching his coffee cup like a lifeline, and immediately launched into his prepared speech. The words poured out in a rush, all about how he hadn't meant for things to go wrong, how he'd been overwhelmed by his feelings for Jessica, how the romance of the wedding had swept him up, how he thought everyone would share in their joy. I listened, sipping my latte and saying nothing. The more he talked, the clearer it became that he still didn't really understand what he'd done wrong. He kept framing it as a misunderstanding, a moment of poor judgment rather than a fundamental betrayal of our friendship and basic social etiquette. I just thought, he said for probably the 10th time, that it would be this beautiful moment. Both couples in love, celebrating together. I never imagined people would react so negatively. Ryan, I finally interrupted, setting down my cup with a sharp click. You proposed to someone else at my wedding reception, during the speeches. How did you think people would react? He winced but pressed on. I know it wasn't ideal timing. But can't you see past that to the intention? I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was just so caught up in my own happiness. And there it was, the crux of the problem. He'd been so focused on his own wants, his own moment, that he'd completely disregarded everyone else. It wasn't malicious, perhaps, but it was breathtakingly selfish. I told him I would think about forgiving him, but I already knew the truth. Our friendship had died the moment he got down on one knee at my reception. Whatever we might have in the future would be something different, something less. The trust was broken, and I wasn't sure it could ever be fully repaired. Over the following months, we met sporadically. Coffee here, lunch there, always stilted and uncomfortable. Every conversation eventually circled back to the wedding, with Ryan defending his actions and me trying to explain why they were indefensible. It was exhausting, and I began to dread his calls asking to meet up. Meanwhile, life moved on. Michael and I settled into married life, decorating our new house and hosting dinner parties for friends who hadn't betrayed us. My career as a marketing director was thriving, and Michael's architecture firm had just landed a major contract. We adopted a golden retriever named Bailey, who immediately became the center of our world. On the surface, everything was perfect. But there was a Ryan-shaped hole in my life that I couldn't quite ignore. Despite everything, I missed my friend. I missed having someone to text random thoughts to throughout the day, someone who understood my history and my jokes. Michael was wonderful, but there are some things only an old friend can provide. The situation with Jessica was even more complex. My wife mourned the loss deeply, though she tried to hide it. I'd catch her scrolling through old photos on her phone, her face sad, before quickly switching to something else when she noticed me watching. They'd been planning to be each other's maids of honor since they were teenagers, to raise their kids together, to be the kind of lifelong friends you see in movies. Now all those dreams were dust. About 6 months after the wedding, we got a save-the-date card in the mail. Ryan and Jessica were getting married. The audacity of them even sending us an invitation was stunning, but I suppose they were trying to extend an olive branch. Or maybe they just wanted to show that their relationship had survived the drama they'd created. Michael's immediate response was to throw it in the trash. "Absolutely not," he said firmly. "We're not going to their wedding after what they did at ours." But I found myself pulling the card back out of the garbage later that night, staring at their smiling faces. They looked happy in the photo, posed in front of a sunset that painted everything golden. A part of me, a part I wasn't proud of, wanted to go, not to celebrate them, but to see for myself if they truly understood what they'd done. Over the next few weeks, Michael and I had several heated discussions about the invitation. He couldn't understand why I'd even consider attending, and honestly, neither could I at first. But slowly, a plan began forming in my mind. It wasn't a kind plan or a mature one, but it felt like justice. You see, during all this drama and heartache, something wonderful had happened. 3 months after our wedding, I'd started feeling unusually tired. Foods I normally loved made me nauseous, and I was emotional in ways that felt unfamiliar. When the pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines, Michael and I had cried happy tears together. We were going to be parents. We'd kept the news private, sharing it only with our immediate families. In the old days, Ryan and Jessica would have been among the first to know. Now, they had no idea about the new life growing inside me, about how our world was about to change in the most beautiful way. The more I thought about it, the more the idea took hold. They'd announced their engagement at my wedding. What if I announced our pregnancy at theirs? It wasn't mature, it wasn't kind, but it felt like balance. Karma, justice. Michael took some convincing. He thought we should just ignore them entirely, live our lives without giving them another thought. But eventually he understood my need for closure, for evening the score. "If this is what you need to move on," he said finally, "then I'll support you. But after this, we're done with them for good." We sent back the RSVP card indicating we would attend. I imagine their surprise when they received it, the discussions they must have had about whether we were coming to support them or cause trouble. Let them wonder, I thought. Let them feel a fraction of the anxiety they'd caused me. As the date approached, I carefully chose my outfit. At 4 months pregnant, I was just starting to show. With the right dress, the bump was obvious. With loose clothing, it could still be hidden. I chose a fitted burgundy dress that made my condition unmistakable. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. The wedding was in October, held at a vineyard about 2 hours outside the city. The venue was pretty enough, though notably smaller and less grand than ours had been. As we pulled into the parking lot, I noticed far fewer cars than I'd expected. The guest list was clearly much shorter than ours had been. Inside, the atmosphere was subdued. Where our wedding had been filled with joy and anticipation, theirs felt tense, like everyone was waiting for something to go wrong. I recognized several mutual friends who looked uncomfortable when they saw us, offering awkward waves and stilted greetings. We found our seats, notably placed toward the back despite our history with the couple. Around us, other guests whispered behind their hands, clearly discussing our presence. I heard fragments of conversation, mentions of the wedding incident, and speculation about why we'd come. The ceremony itself was brief and traditional, lacking the personal touches that had made ours special. Jessica looked beautiful in her dress, though I noticed she'd chosen a style very different from what she'd always told me she wanted. Ryan seemed nervous, constantly adjusting his tie and clearing his throat. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the applause was polite but restrained. No one cheered or whistled like they had at our wedding. The recessional felt rushed, as if everyone just wanted to get through the formalities. The cocktail hour was awkward. People approached us cautiously, as if we might explode at any moment. Some asked directly why we'd come, while others just made small talk while obviously burning with curiosity. I smiled and gave vague answers about moving forward and wishing them well, all while my hand rested protectively on my growing belly. The reception space was nice, but clearly decorated on a budget. Where we'd had thousands of fairy lights, they had a few strands. Where we'd had lush floral arrangements, they had simple centerpieces. It wasn't that the wedding was bad, it was just obviously affected by their social fallout from their actions at ours. During dinner, we were seated at a table with other college friends, people who'd known both Ryan and me for years. The conversation was stilted, everyone careful not to mention the elephant in the room. My friend Stephanie kept shooting me questioning looks, clearly trying to figure out what I was planning. Finally, the speeches began. Jessica's sister gave a brief, generic toast that sounded like she'd Googled maid of honor speech template. Ryan's brother was equally uninspiring, sticking to safe stories and conventional wishes for happiness. No one mentioned how the couple met or their whirlwind romance, the very thing they'd been so eager to announce at our wedding. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. During a lull between scheduled speeches, I stood up. Michael stood with me, his hand on my back in silent support. The room fell quiet almost immediately, all eyes turning to us with a mixture of curiosity and dread. I just wanted to say, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the space, that Michael and I are so happy to be here celebrating with Ryan and Jessica, and we thought this would be the perfect moment to share some joy of our own. I paused, letting the anticipation build, my hand moving to rest visibly on my bump. We're having a baby. The silence that followed was deafening. A few people clapped uncertainly, but most just stared. At the head table, Ryan's face had gone pale, while Jessica's mouth hung open in shock. They understood immediately what I'd done, the parallel I'd drawn. Ryan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. His face was flushed now, anger replacing the shock. He strode over to our table, his hands clenched at his sides. "This was supposed to be our day," he hissed, leaning down so only we could hear. His voice was shaking with rage. "Our wedding day." I looked up at him calmly, channeling every bit of composure I had. "You wanted to share special moments, remember? I thought we'd both get a chance to celebrate." He glared at me, his jaw working as he struggled for words. But what could he say? How could he argue against the very logic he'd used to justify his own actions? The irony wasn't lost on anyone watching, and I could see the realization dawning on faces around the room. Without another word, Ryan stalked back to the head table. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of uncomfortable moments. The music played, people danced half-heartedly, but the mood never recovered. We left early, having accomplished what we'd come to do. In the car on the way home, Michael took my hand. "Feel better?" he asked. "Actually, yes," I admitted. It was petty and probably beneath me, but there was something satisfying about giving them a taste of their own medicine. The score felt settled now, the scales balanced. Over the following years, our lives diverged completely. We welcomed our daughter Sophie into the world on a snowy February morning. She had Michael's green eyes and my stubborn streak, and she filled our lives with a joy I hadn't known was possible. 18 months later, her brother James joined our family, completing our little unit. Meanwhile, through the grapevine of mutual friends, I heard about Ryan and Jessica's struggles. Their marriage, built on a foundation of drama and selfishness, didn't last. The story that reached me was that Jessica had cheated with a coworker and then cleaned out their joint bank account when she left. Ryan was devastated, left with nothing but debt and a broken heart. I wish I could say I felt sorry for him, but mostly I just felt validated. They'd destroyed 2 decades-long friendships for a relationship that couldn't even survive 3 years. The grand romance they'd needed to announce at my wedding had turned out to be nothing more than infatuation dressed up as love. 5 years after my wedding, as I was preparing lunch for Sophie and James, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. My stomach dropped as I read the words. Hey, it's Ryan. I know it's been a long time, but I really need help. Jessica left me and took everything. I'm about to be evicted. Can I crash at your place for a while, please? I stared at the message in disbelief. After everything, after 5 years of silence, he was reaching out because he needed something. Not to apologize again, not to try to repair our friendship, but because he was desperate and had nowhere else to turn. I showed the message to Michael that evening. He read it, shook his head, and handed the phone back. The audacity, was all he said. I typed and deleted a dozen responses over the next hour. Part of me wanted to explain why his request was impossible, to list all the ways he'd hurt us. Another part wanted to just ignore him entirely. In the end, I sent a simple reply. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. I think it's best we keep our distance. His response came quickly. Please, I'm desperate. I have nowhere else to go. I know I messed up, but we were best friends for 15 years. Doesn't that count for something? I didn't answer, but the messages kept coming. He detailed his situation, how Jessica had cheated with someone from her hospital, how she'd convinced him to put everything in her name, how she'd left him with nothing. He sent pictures of eviction notices, screenshots of his empty bank account, pleas that grew increasingly frantic. Finally, he called from yet another unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Please, he said immediately, his voice cracking. Just hear me out. I'm at rock bottom. Jessica destroyed me. I've lost everything, my home, my money, my friends. Everyone turned their backs on me after the wedding thing. You're literally my last hope. Ryan, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm sorry you're going through this, but I can't help you. My family comes first now. Your family, he said bitterly. Right, the family I was supposed to be part of. I was supposed to be Uncle Ryan to your kids. We were supposed to raise our children together, and you threw it all away because of one mistake. You threw it away, I corrected him, when you decided your proposal was more important than my wedding. He was quiet for a moment, then said something that showed he'd learned nothing. You know what? I'll forgive you for ruining my wedding with your pregnancy announcement, but only if you help me now. You owe me that much. I almost laughed at the absurdity. He was trying to manipulate me, to guilt me into helping by offering forgiveness I didn't want or need. This was who he'd always been, I realized. Self-centered, manipulative, unable to see beyond his own needs. Goodbye, Ryan, I said, and hung up. I blocked that number too, and when he inevitably called from others, I blocked those as well. Eventually, the calls stopped. I heard through mutual friends that he'd moved back in with his parents in another state. Some said he was doing better, rebuilding his life. Others said he was bitter and angry, still blaming everyone else for his problems. I didn't much care either way. That chapter of my life was closed. Sometimes when I'm watching Sophie and James play in our backyard, I think about the friendship I lost. Not with sadness anymore, but with a kind of distant curiosity. I wonder if Ryan ever truly understood what he did wrong, if he ever developed the empathy and self-awareness he'd lacked. But mostly, I don't think about him at all. My life is full of genuine friends, people who understand boundaries and respect, who would never dream of hijacking someone's special moment for their own purposes. My sister Claire has become my closest friend, and Michael's sister Rebecca is like the sister I never had. We have couple friends who we vacation with, neighbors who we barbecue with, a whole community of people who enhance our lives. The wedding album sits on our shelf, beautifully edited as Sarah promised. There's no trace of the drama that unfolded, just images of joy and love and the beginning of our life together. When people ask about our wedding, we tell them it was perfect. Because in the end, despite everything, it was. We got married, we're building a beautiful life together, and we learned who our real friends were. Last month, Sophie asked me about the people in some old college photos she found. I pointed out her dad, her aunts and uncles, family friends she knows. When she pointed to Ryan and asked who he was, I simply said, someone we used to know. And that's all he is now. Someone from the past who taught me valuable lessons about friendship, boundaries, and the importance of surrounding yourself with people who truly care about your happiness. The sun sets now on a life so different from the one I'd imagined at 22, when Ryan and I were inseparable and the future seemed so certain. But it's a better life in many ways, built on stronger foundations with people who've proven their worth. The drama of that wedding day, once so devastating, has faded into just another story. A cautionary tale about the importance of choosing friends wisely. As I tuck my children into bed each night, reading them stories and kissing their foreheads, I'm grateful for everything that led me to this moment, even the painful parts, even the betrayals, because without them, I might never have learned to value the genuine relationships in my life, to set boundaries, to protect my own happiness. And in the end, that's the greatest gift Ryan and Jessica gave me, though they never intended to. They taught me that not everyone who claims to love you actually does, that actions speak louder than words, and that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to let go of people who don't deserve a place in your life. It was an expensive lesson, paid for with the partial ruins of my wedding day, but it was worth every penny.